Hey guys, welcome. I'm Catherine and this is Little Bits of Heaven Homestead. Julie over at Dirt Patch Heaven recently requested that I put together a comprehensive overview of incubating with the Incuview incubator, and specifically some troubleshooting and tips and tricks with this specific incubator. So each and every incubator you're going to use is pretty much the same thing. They all have some different variations. This one has been by far my favorite tool to use. I bought mine from Incubator Warehouse. They are a fantastic company, stand behind their products. So if you have any issues or even have some parts break, they will usually offer fantastic customer service and then replacement parts. So one of the reasons that I went with them. And then also because this incubator itself was highly recommended to me by a good friend who raises and hatches tons of eggs, but she is in the rare breed industry, and so I took her word for it. If she has faith to hatch her eggs in it, it would definitely work for my homestead. So the Incuview itself is pretty user-friendly and it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of all the components, and then I will show you the actual programming of it itself, and then do my troubleshooting and tips and tricks. So the Incuview, one of the things I like is that it does have this clear plastic lid, so you can watch the entire process. Although I'll tell you for the first, well, depending on what you're hatching, if you're hatching chicks, being chickens, they typically take about 21 days. Ducks take typically 28 days, unless you're hatching muscovy, those are about 35. I haven't done turkey yet. Peafowl was about 30 days, and then guineas were also 28 days. So you need to know what you're incubating and how long they'll go for, and then you can determine how you're going to do your setup here, because one of the functions on this is programming the number of days. So the components itself, so I do have this running. You can hear it's a 4-stair fan. This is the little arm that operates the egg turner. And so that's important when you put it back together, that you put this little pin here. This is your egg tray. And it has, that is where the little arm for the egg turner goes. Then you have this little plastic screen. And then the base. And the base consists of a series of troughs. This is where you put your water. And it is set up so that if you fill from the center and you overflow the center, it'll fill the outward troughs as it overflows. So I tend to always fill from the center. So your little screen, your egg tray, and do keep in mind where the egg turner leg goes. When I load my tray, I tend to leave, and I'll show you here in the lid in just a second, I leave one space open. So I fully load my egg tray except for one egg. And I'll show you, I strategically locate it. So I'm going to put this back together just to show you this real quick. So you put that little egg turner arm in there. There is this vent port right here. I'm going to show it to you again. See that hole? It comes with a little red plastic plug. I take it out. And in fact, my cats took off with it, and I don't even care because I don't put it in. When I first started incubating, a good friend of mine, she said, pull your plugs, fresh air is so important, pull your plugs, pull your plugs, pull your plugs. And so I've just taken that to heart. I've never had an issue with not having it plugged, and I'm an advocate for fresh air because I think stagnant air is disgusting. And in the confines of an incubator, you've got a perfect breeding ground for bacteria and junk because it is hot and it is humid. So that extra airflow, I think it just keeps things a little healthier, a little safer inside. So that is also where I strategically locate my empty space, is right directly below that. And the reason for that is 3 days before your anticipated hatch, you're going to do something called lockdown, where you treat this as sacred ground. You do not open your incubator for 3 days prior to your hatch. The reason for that is because underneath the shell itself is a thin membrane, and if that gets dried out, your chicks physically cannot hatch from the egg. And so it is so important to keep this as closed as possible. there again, I do leave that vent port open. I don't worry about that. But don't open it because you can shrink wrap your chicks. And then also, rule of thumb is once your chicks start hatching, you do not have to remove them, and you do not want to remove them until they are fully dry. So little fluffy chicks, but they can survive inside the incubator itself for up to 72 hours because they are still self-feeding off of their absorbed yolk. So you won't have to supplement any sort of feed or water. And you do not want to open this while you have other eggs in the process of hatching. If you have any eggs that are pipped or zipped and you open this at all, the likelihood of them getting shrink wrapped is extremely high. And once they're shrink wrapped, they need that process of being able to push through the shell in order to strengthen their legs and their muscles and orient themselves. Typically, if you shrink wrap an egg and then you go in there and you help them physically hatch, they're not going to survive anyway. So do your eggs and your chicks a favor and just resist the urge to open it. I cannot stress that enough. That is probably the hardest part of incubating. So what do you do if your humidity levels, and this was Julie's primary concern, she says, I can't maintain my humidity levels. So if you are having an issue specifically 3 days before and you've got your lockdown on and you are not opening this and you see your humidity levels dropping, what I do is I use this big syringe and I just fill it full of water. This is the purpose of my missing egg, is I will stick my syringe in there, and right here I would have my open spot where I do not have an egg, and then I would be able to insert water into the troughs. It's also located right over that inner trough, so you can fill from the center, fill it out, and ensure that you have enough water to ensure humidity throughout your hatch. If you do experience that you're continuing to dry out and you're adding and you're concerned about it, there's not really anything you can do on your first hatch, but make a note of that. And any future hatches, you could potentially put a sponge full of water, and there again, you might have to strategically locate it so that you can spray it. I have used where I've, before I got smart about leaving an open spot, and I had a fully loaded tray, what I would do is I would take a straw and stick it through there so that it was I could maneuver it in between my eggs and use a smaller syringe and fill up my troughs that way. Okay, so what other troubleshooting could I think of? If you're having issues maintaining your heat, it might be a setting on here. The Incuview itself has several settings, and I'll go through that here in just a second with you. But it gives you the ability to tell it what your room temperature is. So you may need to change that even if you've got your temperature on the Incuview itself set for what you want it to incubate at. If you're having any issues, check and see what the room temperature is set on this. And that does come into play if you're incubating in the winter versus the summer. So there are some factors. Aside from really the number of days on incubating, I tend to leave the presets in this alone. And I'll go through this real quick. So what you want to do when you first set up your incubator is turn it on, make sure all of your settings are set correctly, and then let it normalize for about 24 hours. Purpose of that is if you turn it on, throw all of your eggs in, and then you have issues with, say, your heat and you can't get it up to temperature correctly, you don't want to risk having some partially or semi-developing eggs and then have to stop your process and do some troubleshooting. So make sure that you give it a good solid 24 hours just to make sure that your incubator itself will come up to temperature, it's putting the humidity in there, and that you're feeling comfortable with how it actually functions before you start throwing eggs in there. Okay, so let me show you. So it's got 3 little buttons here, a plus, a minus, and then the enter. The enter is going to let you get into your settings here. And so if you just hold it down, it's going to bring up your different ones. Hatch timer. That is really what I like about this thing. My other incubators in the past did not have this. And what this does is, and depending on what you're incubating, you're going to want to set it. I've got mine set for 28 days because that is, I'm getting ready to stick duck eggs in here. And then it also allows you to change the number of times the egg turner will turn. It's preset at 6. I leave it at 6. Turning your eggs is so important. There is 3 factors that a broody hen provides for the developing eggs underneath her that you are artificially recreating inside your incubator, and that's temperature, humidity, and motion. So a broody hen will turn her eggs naturally underneath her as she moves and settles on her nest. She gets up and eats and goes to the bathroom every day, and as she comes back and she settles in, those eggs move. That's important for exercising the embryo and the chicken side, making sure that it's developing evenly, because if it's laying on one side, it may develop stronger on one side and less on the other. So you need to make sure that it's got that constant motion, and that way it also doesn't get stuck to the inside of one side of the egg. And so this, really neat, does it for you. Don't have to think about it. But what this also does, because you're able to set the hatch time, is 3 days before on lockdown, is it automatically stops turning the eggs. In other incubators I've had to go in and physically remove, like there's some where there's these little egg cups, and I have to actually take out the egg turner and then position all the eggs in there myself. This, it's a set it and forget it. You just program the number of days and it handles turning off the egg turner for you. You don't even have to worry about it. Okay, this model, their newer model, comes with a built-in hygrometer. That's really neat. The last one did not have it. This is your temperature gauge here. When you first get it, it's kind of tucked up in here. You do want to bend it, make sure it's down, touching your eggs. That way you've got the most accurate reading. So as far as humidity goes, you typically want to maintain about 30 to 50% during your hatch. When you get up into lockdown, ideally you're more around 60-70%. There's some different variables involved depending on your ambient humidity. I live in an extremely arid environment, so me adding supplemental moisture is pretty critical. If you're living in a place like Florida where it's extremely humid, you may have to worry less about maintaining your humidity, because nature may just do that for you. Okay, so I think I went through all the basics of the Incuview itself and some incubating basics as far as the first couple days. I do have a really comprehensive video on incubating eggs that would be applicable to any incubator, not necessarily the Incuview, and I'm going to go ahead and attach that. And then I also have videos, and I'm going to do a playlist here. I have videos on moving chicks to a brooder, and then moving chicks from the brooder to outside, so I'm going to throw that into a playlist here. I hope this was helpful. I hope that I gave the information that Julie was asking for. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you don't already subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate it if you do so. And if this was helpful, give it a like and give it a share to those who you think it may be helpful to as well in your life. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I shall talk to you soon.